Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the OnePlus 9 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2024. Now, the first thing I will definitely tell you, I like the OnePlus 9. I think it was a pretty decent phone when it first came out. Is it still worth buying? I think there's a lot of things about this phone that I like, some things that haven't aged the greatest, but we'll talk about that throughout this whole entire video. The first thing I'd recommend doing though, is that if you want to pick up some phones that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the OnePlus 9, on the front of this particular phone, you're basically getting a 6.55-inch fluid AMOLED display. It's a 120Hz panel, 1080p, and I've always felt like this particular phone was a pretty good phone when it first came out. The panel itself is actually fairly decent. You're getting a 120Hz display on this thing, which still holds up fairly well, and it was a curved panel. I actually like curved panels a lot. And throughout my whole entire duration of using these phones, I've always felt like these were very, very good devices when they came down to it. These were 1100 nit panels, which was really cool. Again, 120 Hz, which was really cool. And when I look at this type of device, I think it still looks very good. You have to keep in mind, there's not a lot of things about these phones that can age like terribly. With this type of phone, you're getting like that hole punch, display in the top left corner, very, very thin bezels, and overall, it still looks and feels like a very, very good phone. The only thing is that it's not the brightest panel of all time. So when you compare it against like the Pixels, the Google Pixels of today and the Samsung Galaxy S's of today, you're getting like panels that can get like over 2000 nits of brightness. So with this one getting like half of it, it's definitely not the best panel, but it could have been worse. And this phone came out in 2021, so it's not like this phone came out like this year or anything like that. On the bottom, you're getting a USB Type-C port. The sides of it are like fairly normal, as you could probably expect. On the back side, it's kind of like this like glass back. It's a frosted glass back for the most part, which actually does feel pretty good. It does feel pretty decent. Apparently it had a plastic frame. I don't even remember that, but overall it felt like a pretty decent device. It didn't feel like the most cheapest phone of all time, which I think I actually liked a lot. You were still getting standard wireless charging, but there was no reverse wireless charging on this device, which actually could have been a fairly big turnoff for some people. And I do think that in and of itself was kind of another thing going on for this particular device at that time. So definitely not the biggest deal in the world, but just one of those minor things that was going on at that moment. You're getting this dual camera setup on the backside kind of, which was actually pretty nice. We'll talk about that in a second. It's kind of like a triple camera, but more so as a dual camera. And overall, it still feels like a fairly good phone. Had IP certification on the T-Mobile version only. I don't know why I didn't have it on all of them, but on the T-Mobile version in particular, that one did have, IP certification at the time, which was very, very funny for that particular model to have it. Beyond that though, there's not really anything else super crazy going on with this particular phone. Just know that it was supposed to be the cheaper phone of that year. And I do think overall OnePlus did a decent job with this phone. I don't think they did a bad job. And I actually do give OnePlus a lot of credit for making a phone of this caliber for that price tag. You do actually have to give them some credit there. So that in and of itself was a pretty cool thing going on for this particular phone. Beyond that though, the other big thing going on for this phone, and I think a big reason why many people look at this phone as one worth purchasing, is because of the price tag. $215 is actually a pretty decent price to pay for this thing. That's what I'm seeing on Amazon right now. And this phone is not that old. It's 3 years old. The thing with these OnePlus phones is that a lot of them don't hold their value insanely well. So a lot of them will a lot of them will age these phones up like this. And then over time, they won't be the best phones of all time for the price and everything. I personally kind of believe that for the most part, this type of device is still good. It's still great, but it really isn't the best phone of all time. But we'll talk about that throughout this video. But, so far, the exterior still holds up fairly well, and the price tag of this thing is actually pretty competitive. But then we get into the camera. So this thing, like I said, kind of like a triple camera setup. You're getting a 48 megapixel wide-angle lens, 50 megapixel ultra-wide camera, then a 2 megapixel monochrome lens. And on the front, you're getting a 16 megapixel wide-angle lens. Now, the numbers of this camera might seem good and they might sound like, it's a pretty decent competitive camera. I will tell you, in my personal opinion, this is kind of one of the downsides of buying a phone like this. You're getting 8K on the back with 4K 60 as well on the back as well, which is actually fairly competitive and fairly nice. Like I said before, I like having this type of phone with this type of camera because it is actually a pretty good experience. On the front side, you're getting a 16 megapixel wide-angle lens, which again is good, but it's only 1080p at 30 on the front. Even though this phone could film an 8K capability on the back, I was still not that big of a fan of this particular camera at that time because it actually did feel like, compared to the Samsung camera of that year and the iPhone camera of that year, those phone manufacturers did a much better job at this particular phone than the OnePlus camera of that particular year. So that was kind of one of the issues that I personally ran into with this particular phone. Like, I like this particular phone a lot, but for that particular reason, I was not really that big of a fan of the Samsung Galaxy, of the OnePlus 9 at the time. But the Samsung Galaxy of that year and the other devices, I'm very big fans. Just this camera really wasn't that great. And they teamed up with Hasselblad, and they hyped up that camera so much at that moment that I was like, oh my goodness, this is like a no-brainer. This has to be one of the best cameras of this year. And it wasn't. And that was kind of one of the bigger problems with this particular phone. Beyond that though, this camera still works. It still takes pretty good photos and videos and everything. And I'm still like very, very happy about that. But like I said, when I look at this particular phone as at this point, there's a lot of reasons why I look at a device like the Samsung Galaxy that year as being better deals than the OnePlus 9. So that's kind of how I feel about the camera. In terms of software, this thing started off with Android 11. It went all the way up to Android 13, which was, again, very nice. I liked having Android 13 just, kind of sitting there waiting for me. And I do think that's a really cool thing going on for this particular phone. Unfortunately, we're already on the betas of Android 15, and that kind of is another reason why this particular phone is a little bit aged up when it comes down to it. So I think, once again, if I'm going through and buying some sort of device, I like having my phones that give me a lot better cameras and a lot better capability. And this type of phone is still a very good phone when it comes down to it. But the software experience, even if it's still got software experience, software updates, I'm not a big fan of the current version of this particular software, if I'm being honest. I feel like all these other phone manufacturers can give me a much better experience than this particular device. And I would rather have like a One UI device than this particular phone. That's exactly how I feel about it. And I felt like this for a long periods of time as well. And if I go ahead and buy something like the Samsung Galaxy S21, I'm getting a better, software supported phone. If I'm getting the iPhone of that year, a much better software supported device as well. And that's just how I kind of feel about it. So once again, take it as you will, but that's how I feel about it. And that's just kind of what happens. So once again, take it as you will, but that's how I feel about this particular phone as of this moment. And that kind of sums down to the performance side as well. I mean, this phone had that Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 chipset inside with, the Adreno 660 GPU and 8 or 12 gigabytes of RAM. And the thing I'll tell you about this particular phone, again, when it comes down to it, is that the performance of this phone is probably one of its better assets. I like this phone a lot from the performance side, and I do think that in and of itself is another very good thing going on for this particular phone. Unfortunately, once again, and when I compare it against the other phones of that year, they were definitely giving you better hardware and software, mixture, cameras, everything like that. But this phone was giving you basically the same type of chipset as the main flagships of that year. And the other big thing too, they were basically giving you more RAM compared to the other phones around this size. When you look at the Galaxy S21, slightly smaller, but you weren't getting 12 gigs of RAM on that one. The S21 Plus, again, not the same type of RAM. So I think that's kind of a big upgrade going up to something like the OnePlus 9 compared to something like maybe some other phones in the same, price tag. But I look at the Samsung Galaxy S21s and the S22s as probably being better phones than this one. I keep going back to those phones, but it's because they were roughly around the same price tag and the size at the time. And then the battery life, 4,500 mAh, actually a pretty decent sized battery. But again, when I look at it, compare it against the competition of that year, those other phones were able to give you basically almost the same size battery with reverse wireless charging. That was kind of another reason why I looked at this phone as probably not being the best one when it came down to it either. So I will tell you, I liked the OnePlus 9 when it first came out, but over time it hasn't aged the best. And, it really comes down to the camera quality and even like a mixture of the software. I'm just not a big fan of those two things. Beyond that though, if you still need to buy an Android phone, this thing's already kind of outdated with software. I would recommend buying the Pixel 6 if you want to, or the Pixel 7, the Samsung Galaxy S21 or S22, or the Plus or Ultra versions of those phones. I'd probably recommend buying those ones before I'd recommend buying the OnePlus 9 in 2024. So that pretty much covers it up here. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.